Hello everyone, it's Alex from Bali. And yeah, I feel like I'm on a roll today. There's so much that wants to come through, and I really feel like here we are, we're living in this magical little bubble of ours. We're currently in lockdown again, who knows until when. And so we really are in this bubble of ours in the middle of the jungle, and just receiving deliveries. Whatever we need gets delivered, and other than that, we're here. And it's beautiful and it's peaceful, and at the same time, I'm thinking of so many people whose life at the moment isn't peaceful and isn't so beautiful because they're wrapped up in a lot of fear and confusion. And so, what can I do? I can share my experience, my knowledge, my wisdom gained, and some of you may benefit. So a couple things. I posted today a post about trauma, and in relation to like what I've learned about it and our cat. And there's more to share. There's only so much that you can share in writing on Instagram. And I felt like so many of us now, especially with everything that is happening, that has happened, there's a lot of us that are in trauma, or rather, many of you will not even recognize that you are in trauma, because we have learned to live with trauma, we've normalized trauma, and we just have to get on with it. Like, I've lived with a lot of trauma throughout my life, and just kind of like, yeah, whatever, this thing happened and that thing happened, and I was raised in a certain way, but whatever, now I'm okay, now I'm away from that, or so forth. And so we normalize, we kind of just we have to get on with it. And like when I had little children, I was traveling around the world and for work and all of that, so it was like I just had to get on with it until life, health, whatever stops us in our tracks and everything comes to the surface. And what I've realized from my own experience is that what has been going on in the world is triggering a trauma response in many of us. And I know that this is what happened to me last year. I came to Bali with, we were here to start our new life, to start a healing center and a lot of other things. And it was like, okay, here we are, we've worked a long time to get to this point. And then everything came to a halt, and we found ourselves on a tiny little island of Gili Air in lockdown for 10 weeks, where I was cooked. And what I realized after several months was like, hang on, I'm in a trauma response, because what happened reminded me, put me back into a state where I was many years ago. And I'm pretty convinced, I see this with my clients, I see this with a lot of people reaching out, that this is happening to a lot of you, a lot of us. And we talk a lot about trauma, but we often don't realize that trauma does not necessarily mean that you were abused by your parents, in a hectic way, or it doesn't mean that you had some big and horrible things happen to you. It can mean little things that to the 6 months old you, or the 2-year-old you, or the 5-year-old you, or the 11-year-old you, those things that we have just normalized, for the little precious being that you were, that we all were at a small age, that was violating to the soul. And again, the only reason why I know, yes, I've learned a lot about trauma in books and courses, But it's always our own experience that really teaches us the depth to which trauma can touch us and affect us. And what I've seen, as I've worked with my own trauma, is that oftentimes little events that I kind of thought like, yeah, okay, I knew that happened, but whatever, I've grown out of it, like that's not my reality anymore. But those events are still stuck in our body. And then they get played out in intimacy issues, even though we are with our soulmate. They get played out in relationship issues, whether it's friendship or work, any kind of relationship can trigger, because that is where most of our wounding as babies and children happened. And I also want to point out, that it's like our parents, and I've done a lot of blaming of my parents, but what I realized is that our parents have equally, the only reason why they were able to inflict trauma, unbeknownst, most of them completely unwillingly, but they inflicted their trauma onto us because they also grew up with trauma, and I've held a lot of anger and a lot of resentment towards my parents for that. And I've realized, at the tender age of 47, that I can't blame them. I can't blame them. I have to have compassion. And that word compassion used to just completely, it actually used to freeze me. It used to, bring up so much rejection. And it took many, many years for me to really get, what does it mean to have compassion? And compassion is when we understand where our traumas, our issues come from, then we can see the whole world, now more than ever, is traumatized in a deep way. And when we are traumatized, in big ways or minor ways, we inevitably will perpetuate trauma in the world as well. And from my perspective now, that is our biggest problem in the world. I mean, it's been for many, but it's what's coming to the surface. And so, just as an example, when I was just starting this lifestyle, when I had to heal my body because I was, bedridden, at the time, I was not a vegan. I was not plant-based. I had zero intention of becoming plant-based, even though I had done a lot of spiritual work and, being in spiritual circles with people that were vegan. I always found like veganism, plant-based, like that's kind of far out there. I was eating grass-fed, raw milk cheeses, all of that kind of stuff. So I was already on a pristine diet. I was like, okay, that makes complete sense. But why would I leave out animal products? However, and especially when I would hear people say, oh, but you've got no idea of the suffering of the animals and you can feel it, I'd be like, what are they even talking about? I'm a compassionate person, so I thought, and I'm a sensitive person, but I don't feel the pain of the animals, or and then it would say, well, watch a video about, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, well, that's just how it is, so that was my stance at the time, and I just couldn't for the life of me feel any of that other reality that people were talking about. But I did go plant-based for health reasons, and I thought to myself, well, once my body's healed, I'm gonna go back to my beloved eggs, which were really like my passion, and maybe a little bit of raw milk cheese, and the occasional, I wasn't ever really big on meat, but like the occasional grass-fed burger or whatever, like I'll go back to a little bit of that. And that's how my journey began. And not very long into the journey, maybe, I don't know, 9 months or something into the journey of healing and being plant-based predominantly, I would still occasionally fall back into old habits. But something started to shift on an emotional and spiritual level. Like, I remember actually the day that all of a sudden I became interested in recycling and composting, which my husband had been, but I would often kind of like, be the rebellious wife and defy him and chuck things all in one place. And, like I was defiant. And eventually just something started to shift. I was like, no, I want to compost. Like, I want to be respectful to the planet. And I still thought, like, Alex, what are you now getting into? Like, you're becoming a bit too green. These were my, intimate thoughts. And then as that shifted slowly, I can't remember now what exactly happened, but I do remember at some point I did eat some animal product, probably a burger, because at the time that was like my cheap thing. And I could feel in my body, and for days after, I could feel my whole energy plummeted from this really expansive state, and I could feel the suffering of the animals. And I was like gobsmacked. I was like, oh my gosh, I thought this was bullshit. But once I had the experience in my body, in my consciousness, I couldn't get rid of that, And so then obviously like my consciousness grew and expanded and elevated, and my love and respect for the animals also grew and expanded, and now I get it, However, I always promised myself not to become one of those preachy vegan, certainly not preachy vegan, but even not preachy plant-based people, because I know how annoying, like I know on the other side how annoying it is and how much it can shut one down, So I'd rather, the stories that I want to share are the stories of, we can't see what we can't see. We can't feel what we can't feel until we make the shift. However, now that I've made the shift and I've been on this journey, probably now fully plant-based or vegan, whatever you want to call it, for maybe like 4 or 5 years, whereas the years before I was probably like 95% plant-based, but every now and again I would still have a craving for something. I'd feel bad, and then I would understand on a deeper level. So for those of you that are looking to become vegan, plant-based, change your diet, know that it's a journey, and that it's not something, for most people, it's not something that you just decide from one day to the next, but rather it's something that you do slowly over time. And I really feel that for many different reasons, that's the way to do it. Because then you're going to learn, and you're not going to waver. You're not going to wonder, am I on the right track? It's like, no, I'm on the right track because I can feel it. I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my consciousness. So how does that tie in with trauma? So until I had this realization of, the suffering of the animals, and that is what I was taking in, I didn't see anything wrong with slaughtering animals, for our food and consumption and all of that. And that's a level of trauma that I couldn't tap into. Once I could, it also opened up new levels of trauma that I had experienced. Like, it made me more sensitive. And, in this world, we kind of tend to believe that being too sensitive, many people say, oh, I'm too sensitive. There's no such thing as being too sensitive. Our sensitivity, if I look at animals, if I look at even, just nature, nature, to be natural is to be sensitive. And if you want to be spiritually connected, if you want to really be in oneness, which we all do, you're not going to escape sensitivity. In fact, our sensitivity is our preciousness. But we're scared of it because sensitivity makes us vulnerable. And as we are on the journey of bringing all the sensitivities to the surface, we have to feel everything. And that oftentimes, that's the scariest part of this journey. And in fact, the most difficult part of going plant-based for a lot of people is the fact that they start feeling everything that has been suppressed, because when we eat animal products, especially when we eat predominantly animal products, the animal products, because of the hormones and adrenaline and just stimulation that they bring, they keep us in a state of kind of fake energy. It's like when you drink a coffee. We don't drink coffee, we don't do stimulants. Every now and again I'll do a matcha latte now that my body's healed and that I feel like, okay, every now and again I'll do that, which is, it is different. It's still a stimulant, but it is definitely not as kicking as the caffeine. But my husband, it took him a little bit longer to get off coffee, and whenever he would go and have a coffee without wanting me to know, I'd always catch him out. How? Because he'd come in like, he'd be all like super jumpy and happy, and kind of like his way of speaking would change. And then I go like, oh, have you had a coffee? He's like, well, how do you know? So it was like, it became our thing of like, I know because you're in an elevated state. And this whole business of self-development, spirituality, a lot of it banks and rides on us being in this euphoric state, right? It's like, let's be elevated, love and light, quantum leaping, like let's just shoot ourselves off to God. Why? Because we don't have the capacity to manage the reality that is in our body. Because when you do connect, if you're human, if you're here in flesh, you have trauma. If you're a human and you start opening yourself up to what really happens in the world and what has been happening for generations, so it's like nothing, a lot of it is not our fault, but here we are, and we need to be able to feel it all so that we can make the shift in consciousness and be grounded in reality. Like, what is this reality really like? What is really happening? And for me, it's also not about, it's not about, what is it called? Can't think of the name now. Conspiracies. It's not about conspiracies and conspiracy theories, because are they real? Are they not real? To what degree? Sure, to a degree, there's truth in everything, and there is a lot of evil happening. But again, when we realize that the only reason why the evil is happening, why people are perpetrators, why we inflict pain on one another, is because of the trauma. Because the reality is that the minute that we liberate ourselves, we alchemize, liberate, let go of the trauma, the various traumas that we have, we become incapable of hurting. Like, it's actually not our human nature. When we live connected to source, when we live in a healthy, thriving body, when we are living our purpose, and when we are connected to our purpose, and when that becomes our focus, it's like, okay, I know what I'm here for, this is what I'm doing, I have everything at my disposal that I need to live my purpose, and when I live my purpose, I'm in my highest joy. And when I'm in my highest joy, I can be of service, and I just receive whatever I need so that I can give what I'm here to give. Then you're just in a cycle of life. You are living the pure eros of life. And when you're living in the eros of life, which, if we can compare it, it's a little bit like when you first fall in love with somebody, right? Like those first few weeks, months, sometimes years. Can you imagine when you are in that state, can you imagine doing harm to anyone? No. When you're in that state of being completely newly in love with someone, you just want to kiss and bless the whole world, right? I mean, everybody, we've all experienced this. And that is the natural state of all of us. Like, we're all capable, and, you know, in my opinion, we should all be living like that. And that's the state when we live in complete harmony with nature, with our nature, which includes our shadows that we're here to heal and evolve from. So when everything has its rightful place and we're living in our purpose in a healthy body, there's no potential for harm, right? All we want to do is just pour our goodness out. And this is something to, you know, just really contemplate and sit with, because we can get it in our minds and go like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if you really feel into that, and then you start seeing, okay, everything that is happening in the world, it's happening because of fear, because of trauma, and ultimately because these bodies are so deeply disconnected from nature. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching about, you know, health, trauma, purpose, spirituality, because it's all one. We can't be spiritual, we can't be connected when we're still living in a body that is not functioning according to the laws of nature, that doesn't even recognize nature. And what I mean by that is that, you know, a lot of us, and I was one of them for many years as well, and I'm just a few steps ahead. I'm not, you know, all the way, but I'm a few steps ahead from many of us that can only function on death. What does that mean? Many of us can only eat animal products, maybe a little bit of vegetables, but we can function well on dead food, processed foods, and oh, you want to come visit my laboratory? Yes, I love my laboratory kitchen. You know, so we have to kind of see this, like, understand what I'm saying with neutral mind, not with like, oh, you know, she's going against animal products. Not what I'm saying. But I'm saying the reality is most people out there can only function on a lot of dead animals, very little and often no fruit and vegetables, because that causes a reaction. And, you know, and fats and all those kind of things, those are fine. Fruit and vegetables cause a reaction. That's the reality of the vast majority of people out there. What does that tell us? Like, it tells us that we are living zombies. And it may sound like a harsh word, but it is the truth. And we have to start contemplating this and then going, okay, all of us need to start clambering out of the death space into a space where true life is actually possible, and where we become this embodiment of the life source that flows through us, that wants to flow through us, but oftentimes it can't, because we become so denatured and so degenerate. And, you know, essentially the layers are, we're traumatized, and trauma causes contraction and numbness of feeling, but also of organs. Like, every single time that I've released a new layer of trauma, my organs start to function better. Like, just recently I've been doing some work with a not a chiropractor, craniosacral therapist, who also works on organs. So we were releasing trauma from my 2 C-sections. One was an emergency. The second one, I was like too terrified to repeat the first. So I had 2 C-sections with my children. And, you know, I was like, oh, minimal scars. I feel fine. I don't think there's anything. And as he started working on that, so much pain, emotion started coming up. It was radical, you know. There was just like I was grunting, I was biting myself from the pain. Like I was in such a state. And I just allowed myself to, go through the emotions, because obviously that was stuff that I couldn't go through, while I was going through the actual first emergency C-section and then the second one. And just the body remembering the trauma. So a lot happened on the table, but then 2 days after the treatment, I could just feel like a shift in my whole body. Like I just felt like I'm opening deeper, they were just physical shifts that I could feel. And bowel movements, which I don't have bowel movements issues anymore, but I could feel, there's a shift, because when you're really in touch with your body, any little shift, you can feel it. You can feel everything, and it's a good thing. And also for 2 days later, I was kind of shedding a lot of emotional stuff. So my point is, and this was just one piece that I recently did. I did a lot deeper stuff, and who knows what's yet to come, because with trauma it releases as there's maturation for it, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual maturation. It's not something that you can kind of will or force. It's when we're ready, when we have the willingness, the desire, then life will make it happen. But my point is that with every trauma release, there are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual changes. And, I've had experiences then days later as the trauma was released that I felt like in a complete psychedelic, expansive kind of orgasmic state, because now there's more space for life to come through and more space for self-expression, which is what we're here for. We're here to be self-expressed, self-realized. Like that is what it is. It's self-expression. And the self-expression, it's innocent. It's a movement that just arises out of us. It's not like, ooh, I want to be like this and like that, which is more what social media promotes. And even, this whole business of spirituality, often it shows us like, this is what it looks like, feathers, bindis, or, whatever. It's like spirituality is like, it's more, for me, it's a deeply shamanic experience. It's visceral. It needs to be visceral. And when we allow ourselves to tap into our visceral knowing and experience, that is when we become, it's not even that we become spiritual people. We are by nature. But we can't realize it until it becomes a physical experience. So, do you see how all the pieces fit together? It's as the trauma releases, we're able to feel more, open up to more. Because until the trauma is there, I can't feel what's happening to animals or people, because if I would have to then also feel what happened to me. And I know for many years, even though I was always, a sensitive person and tapped in, if you will, but I also had so many layers, and still there's layers of numbness, and this journey of cleansing out the body, cleansing out the trauma, it opens everything up. And as we open, we become healthy, because there is more life force running through our body, and inevitably we become, we start to fulfill more and more of our true purpose, and we become of service to the world, because that's our nature. Every single one of us, that is our nature, and I believe we all are here for a very specific reason and purpose. So I hope this was helpful. I'm trying to think, did I tie it all together? We started with the cat. I know some of you only joined now. Maybe I'll just quickly finish with, the cat story. This cat that came to me as I was working through some deep pre-verbal trauma that was ready to be released. And, and as always, when trauma arises, it seems like it's the only thing that exists. And it's like your whole life starts to kind of like, it looks like it's falling apart because the only thing that exists is this trauma. It wants to be seen, it wants to be felt, it wants to be loved, it wants to be accepted. So it's just in your face. And as I was going through this, this cat started coming to me, and it came in a form first of like this desire, which I'd never had a desire previously to have a cat. There was the desire of having a Maine Coon cat. So I looked at some pages, online in Bali and Jakarta and so forth. And then I found this cat on a page in Jakarta. And something just kind of like moved me. Even though he wasn't a kitten, I really wanted a kitten, but he was 6 months old. And, long story short, I started having dreams about him. So he was like really expensive, and my husband was like, I don't know, don't know how long we're gonna be in this house, and do we really want to get a cat now? And we already had a cat which then ran away, but that's a whole other story. So it was like this whole umming and ahhing. But then he came to me in my dreams, and I could just feel, he was like saying, I'm meant to be with you. And I could feel that it wasn't just like, nice to be with you, like there was something deeper there. So anyway, we got the cat, and he came, and he was like terrified the first few weeks, absolutely terrified, always lying under my daughter's bed, and like very wild and feral, like he just wouldn't come near us. And I could just feel his terror. I would just go and sit in the room and meditate with him early in the morning. My husband and I would go and do singing bowls for him, and just really like hold space for him and like say, you're so safe. And I knew why he had come. So I would say, look, I know what you're going through, because I'm healing that aspect of myself. And slowly he would come out of the bed, and he would just sit there and kind of go like, okay, I'm going to be near, but don't touch me. And then maybe I would try and touch him, and he would go back under the bed. And then eventually he sort of brushed up against me, and if I tried to grab him and hold him, he would again like run away and almost go like, I'm not ready for that. And slowly he just warmed up. And eventually we took him outside for the first time, and I realized this cat had never been outdoors. By then he was like, 6.5 months old. He had never been outdoors. And he just had this like extreme joy exploding out of him, because he was now in his natural element. And even for a moment I thought, oh my gosh, maybe because he's never been outdoors, he doesn't know how to handle it, and he's going to disappear. But it was like, no, I just want to be outdoors. I want to jump around. I want to explore. And he'd come back and, always like look at us with this energy of gratitude. Like it was like very telepathic. Like I knew what he was going through. And as he was healing, I was doing my healing. And now, fast forward, I think he's been with us almost 4 months now. And now he's just, lying in bed with us in the morning, but you can see it with such joy and expansion, and he rolls around like cats do. And, he doesn't know, like, do I want to give more love to me or to my husband? And, like, what do I do with all this love that I'm feeling? And just this experience, like, imagine if this is what a cat goes through, a cat that has been abused as a kitten. Imagine for us humans, and to see how long it's taken him. In fact, now I was just reflecting, he used to not play with toys. Like, what kitten doesn't play with toys? He just wouldn't even react, because when you're in trauma, you can't play. When you're in trauma, everything is fucking serious. And you're not playful, you're not spontaneous, you're not joyful. You can try for a little bit, but there's no spontaneity, because your nervous system is in constant fight or flight. And now, recently, we got a few more toys, and now I can see, like, every now and again, like, he'll jump on a toy and he'll start playing. And that's, proof of just how long it takes for trauma to resolve, but also that trauma does resolve. And we don't need to it's not about fixing or doing. It's about holding space for ourselves, for the trauma, and asking for whatever resources we need and allowing ourselves to receive what we truly need, which oftentimes is so vulnerable, because we have to remember that when we heal, most of our trauma happened, pre-verbal, early infancy. That's kind of like the trauma that mattered the most, and that has most impact. And that trauma, the only way it can resolve is if we give those little beings, the 6 months old, the 2-year-old, he needs to be given what she needs. And oftentimes that's security. It's, unconditional love, like it's the basics. And when we haven't received the basics, how can we grow? How can we expand? We can't. We can with our mind. And it's, so much of what's going on is like we're living from mind, from illusion. But it's very different when we start to heal these aspects in the body. We blossom in a whole new way in our lives. So yeah, that's kind of all I've got. What's the comment? There is a huge theme for me right now, learning to play. Yeah, it's huge for all of us, And I remember different stages on my healing journey where, having given myself a lot of space to just be and heal, even in a sense what we're doing here in Bali, yes, we're busy, but we're just really doing what's good for us and then sharing it. And so having a lot of this time, a lot of the time is spent, like before we get into a rhythm of play and creativity and flow, I found was spent just lying on the bed, lying on the couch, going like, I don't know what to do. I've got all this time, I've got all the resources, but I don't even know how to play, how to have fun, how to enjoy. And then we just have to sit with that, So a lot of the trauma work is about, and trauma release is really about, yes, there's certain techniques and, absolutely. And there's a lot of also just physical things we can do to open and, and I'll post some more of that. But ultimately, the most important work for releasing trauma is honoring our desires, honoring our needs, and to take our needs seriously, because that's exactly what didn't happen when we were children, right? When we were told like, oh, you mustn't cry about that, or or the baby that just cries because it wants to be in constant contact, skin contact with mom. It's natural, but we have made it unnatural, and there's still a lot of people out there that try to convince mothers that it's okay to leave their children crying in the bed. It's one of the most abusive things you can do to your children, and it has deep repercussions. So, these are the subtleties, and it's nobody's fault. It's just, I see those that have been raised to ignore the children, they're going to do it again, and they're going to normalize it, until somebody in our lineage stops the buck and goes, enough. Like, I know that that's not right, So I hope this was helpful. Obviously, I could go on and on and on with this subject. It is endless, but we're going to leave this here and sending you all my love till the next time. Bye, everyone.